Mark and Alice were what the glossy magazines liked to call inevitable. They moved through the city like a single polished organism, young and striking, their reflections multiplying in every pane of glass they passed. They built their life the way careful people build a portfolio, a shared apartment that smelled faintly of fresh paint and ambition, matching gym memberships, dinner parties where they spoke about 5-year plans and smiled like investors who already knew the outcome. Mark believed in the arithmetic of loyalty. Put in the hours, pay the emotional dues, and a future would compound. Alice believed in something else entirely, though it took her a long time to admit it even to herself. She believed in leverage, in the idea that love was just another market, and the only real sin was buying too low. Him arrived without drama, which is how real catastrophes tend to enter your life. He was older, wrapped in the quiet gravity of someone who never checked prices, who occupied penthouses and black cars the way other men occupied bus seats. He noticed Alice in a room the way a hawk notices a field mouse, not because she was loud, but because she was bright, and because she was hungry. The lunches turned into dinners, the dinners into private clubs with walls of velvet and menus that read like small novels. He talked about deals and acquisitions, about flying to Monaco on a whim, about a world where nothing was delayed by indecision. Mark, with his spreadsheets and his carefully scheduled future, began to feel like a thrift store suit next to a tailored one. Alice didn't hate him for it. Hatred would have required emotion. She simply outgrew him. The shift inside her was subtle at first, a recalibration rather than a rupture. She started to see Mark not as a partner, but as an obstacle, a liability that could spoil the narrative she was writing for herself. In that narrative, she was not a woman who abandoned a good man for a richer one. She was a survivor, betrayed, forced by circumstance into the arms of someone who could protect her. Victims get sympathy. Victims get clean exits. To become one, she needed Mark to be a villain, and villains are easier to manufacture than people like to admit. The plan came to her the way a clean surgical solution does, cold, efficient, with no wasted motion. She would not accuse him without evidence. She would not stage a loud, messy confrontation. She would let him damn himself, or at least the version of him she was about to create. Somewhere between a boutique hotel and a discreet online directory, she found the woman who would do it, a professional with a smile calibrated to lower defenses and a resume written in euphemism. Money made the conversation painless. A few $1,000s bought not just the woman's time, but her silence, her acting skills, her willingness to be a ghost when the job was done. Alice felt nothing as she made the arrangements. The old warmth she'd once associated with Mark had been replaced by a cool, clinical focus, the kind surgeons have when they're about to cut. She imagined the life waiting for her on the other side of this betrayal. Mornings in sunlit kitchens with marble countertops, weekends on yachts, a closet full of dresses that still smelled of newness. She imagined him beside her, amused and approving, a man who would never ask her to settle. In that future, Mark existed only as a cautionary tale, a meme you drop when you want to explain why you deserve better. The night she handed over the cash, the city hummed outside the cafe window, indifferent and bright. The woman counted the bills with professional efficiency, her eyes flicking up only when Alice leaned in, her voice a thin blade. There was no tremor, no doubt. "Make it look like he broke my heart," she said, sliding the envelope across the table as if it were a menu. The woman nodded, already disappearing into the role she'd been paid to play. Alice sat back, ordered another coffee, and felt the last fragile thread of her old life snap without a sound. The hotel she chose was one of those anonymous structures built to host other people's secrets, a slab of concrete and flickering neon that promised privacy and delivered only a different kind of exposure. Mark arrived there already cracked open, primed by weeks of carefully engineered distance and Alice's practiced coldness. He told himself he was just meeting a stranger for a drink, a stupid, impulsive act meant to numb the quiet terror of feeling his relationship slipping through his fingers. The woman waiting for him in the dim bar knew better. She had studied the file Alice had given her, memorized his hesitations and his soft spots, and she leaned into them with a smile that felt warm even as it was being deployed like a tool. She spoke about loneliness, about bad men, about how sometimes you just need to feel wanted. Mark, starving for any kind of affirmation, swallowed every word. By the time they moved upstairs, the room smelled of cheap disinfectant and old smoke, a place that had never known anything as noble as love. The woman was a professional, guiding him through the encounter with the ease of someone who had turned intimacy into choreography. She laughed at his jokes, brushed her fingers against his arm at precisely the right moments, made him feel briefly powerful in a life where he'd begun to feel very small. Mark knew, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this was a mistake, but mistakes can feel like mercy when you're desperate enough. He stepped over that last line because he believed he had already been abandoned, because Alice's absence had hollowed him out and left him aching for proof that he still existed. The door flew open at the exact moment it was meant to. Alice stood there, framed by the cheap wallpaper and the yellow light, her eyes wide, her hand flying to her mouth in a gesture she'd practiced in front of a mirror. The scream that tore out of her was pure theater, a sound designed to shatter glass and reputations alike. "How could you?" she cried, her voice breaking with a precision that would have earned her applause on a better stage. Tears came on cue, hot and convincing, tracing paths down her cheeks as she looked at Mark, not with love, but with the kind of revulsion reserved for something rotten. The woman scrambled for her clothes, playing her own small part in the farce, muttering apologies that sounded sincere enough to wound. Mark tried to speak, to explain, but the words tangled in his throat and died there. Guilt flooded him, thick and suffocating, because he believed the story Alice was selling, that he had been weak, that he had destroyed everything with his own hands. Alice hurled accusations like knives, each one landing exactly where it was meant to. She told him he was a liar, a cheat, a small man who had never deserved her. When she finally fled the room, sobbing into her perfectly manicured hands, she left behind a silence that was louder than any scream. Within hours, her old life was packed into suitcases by people she paid to be discreet. She didn't look back at the apartment she and Mark had shared, didn't linger over the photos on the wall. By nightfall, she was stepping into the antiseptic gleam of him's mansion, a place of glass and steel where every surface reflected her new, unblemished story. The air there smelled of money and nothing else. She showered off the grime of the hotel and slipped into a silk robe, letting the water wash away the last traces of the woman she'd pretended to be. Mark, meanwhile, sat alone on the edge of a bed that no longer felt like his, surrounded by the debris of a life he thought he had ruined. The phone never rang. The apartment, once filled with plans and laughter, echoed with his own breathing. Outside, the city went on, indifferent to the quiet collapse of one small man. He stared at the wall and replayed the moment of her scream over and over, each time believing it a little more, each time sinking deeper into the wreckage she had so carefully arranged.
3 years is long enough for a lie to harden into architecture. Alice lived inside hers now, a palace of glass and white marble perched above the city, reflecting nothing but wealth and carefully curated success. She had married him, or at least fused her life to his in every way that mattered. The parties were flawless, the wine was older than most of the guests, and the past had been sanded smooth until it no longer cut. In this version of the story, she was a woman who had survived a weak man and been rescued by a powerful one. The myth was airtight. That was the problem with myths. They make you stop checking for leaks. Mark existed in the negative space beneath that glittering skyline. He worked a job no one remembered his name at, lived in a basement apartment where the walls sweated and the light never quite reached. The guilt he carried had rotted into something quieter but heavier, a permanent pressure on his chest. He had spent 3 years believing he was the kind of man who destroyed everything he touched. That belief had shaped him more completely than any prison ever could. The truth came from the only person who had nothing left to sell. The woman tracked him down with the weary precision of someone finally done running. She told him about Alice's money, her instructions, the way his humiliation had been scripted in advance. There was no drama in her voice, just a tired accounting of a job she wished she'd never taken. Mark listened, and with every word, the old narrative collapsed. The monster he had been punishing himself for being was a character Alice had written. Some men would have tried to confront her, some would have begged for explanations. Mark felt none of that. What he felt was a strange, almost serene detachment, as if the last thread tying him to the idea of mercy had finally been cut. He didn't want to hurt her in the way lovers hurt each other. He wanted to destroy the world she had built on his bones.
So he gathered the pieces of the truth, like shrapnel, bank records, messages, testimony. The woman's sworn statement, brutal in its simplicity. A trail of financial irregularities that showed how Alice had used her lover's money to bury the past. Each file, each document was another jagged fragment designed to tear through something fragile and expensive. This was his grenade, not fire and steel, but information so volatile it could only end in ruin. He released it all at once, to the press, to her husband's lawyers, to the boards and banks that made her lifestyle possible. The effect was immediate and merciless. The story that had once painted her as a victim flipped into something grotesque and unrecognizable. Sponsors fled, investigations opened. Him turned from partner to predator in a matter of hours. His lawyers suddenly very interested in how much Alice had cost him. The mansion of glass became a fishbowl, every flaw exposed, every lie magnified. Alice tried to fight it, but you can't negotiate with a blast wave. The socialite who had once floated through charity galas was reduced to a name in headlines, then a defendant in court filings, then a woman no one would return a call from. The pressure of it all crushed her with the same efficiency she had once applied to Mark. Whether she survived that collapse in any meaningful way was almost beside the point. The woman she had been was gone, buried under the wreckage of her own design. Mark didn't escape unscathed. When the dust settled, there were charges, lawsuits, and a legal system that doesn't care about poetic justice. He ended up in a gray cell, staring at a wall that gave him nothing back. He had detonated the truth and been caught in the fallout. His old life was still gone, So was hers. In the vault, justice doesn't bring peace, it just brings silence. Welcome home.